While repairing the electric wires in my parents' basement, the electrician turned ashen and shaking. He muttered, "Grab your stuff and get out immediately. Don't warn your parents." I glanced down into the basement, frozen in terror, and called the cops without hesitation. Can you imagine finding out your own family tried to murder you? Not some stranger, not an enemy, but the very people you called family. The chilling truth was hidden in a dark, forgotten basement, waiting to shatter my entire world. It was a secret powerful enough to destroy everything I thought I knew, and it was unearthed on an afternoon that seemed utterly ordinary. What the hell happened next? For years, I thought the greatest tragedy in my life was my father leaving my mother to marry another woman. But I was wrong. The real pain began on an afternoon when the electrical system in our old house malfunctioned. I found myself heading down to the basement with an electrician, a place I'd been forbidden to enter throughout my entire childhood. The air down, there was damp, musty, heavy with the smell of rusted metal. Each step on those old wooden stairs echoed like a warning. Then, in a fleeting moment, as the flashlight beam swept across the room, we both froze. The electrician trembled so much he dropped his tools, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. Before my eyes was the secret my family had hidden for years. "Hi, I'm Jacob Caldwell. I'm 24, freshly graduated from college, and standing at the edge of a life I've never truly understood. Sitting in my small rented apartment in Portland, Oregon, I often gaze out the window, watching the rain-soaked streets and wondering why everything in my life has become so warped. Some days, I feel like a forgotten puzzle piece in my family's picture, one that no one wants to fit into place. My story starts there, in the days when I was just a boy living in a 3-story craftsman house in the suburbs of Portland, where the first cracks in my life began to appear. I was born into a middle-class family, not wealthy, but we never wanted for anything. My father, Samuel Caldwell, 52, owned a small construction company. He was a tall man with a deep voice and an air of authority. His sharp eyes seemed capable of seeing through anything, yet, strangely, he never truly saw me. He was consumed by blueprints, endless meetings, and grand dreams of expanding his business. His ambition, I believe, was what widened the gap between him and my mother, Monica. My mother was a gentle woman, soft brown hair, a smile as warm as autumn sunlight. She loved me, I knew that. She'd spend hours telling me fairy tales, stroking my hair when I was scared during nighttime storms. But her marriage to my father was like a house built on sand, beautiful from a distance, but one big wave could bring it crumbling down. I still remember the nights when my mother sat silently in the kitchen, her eyes red, while my father grumbled about money or work. I was just a 10-year-old boy then, clutching my worn-out teddy bear in bed, my heart constricted by the arguments that echoed through the thin walls. Then that day came. I was 10. My parents officially divorced. I vividly recall that morning. My mother sat on the sofa, a small suitcase at her feet. Her trembling hands pulled me into a tight embrace. "Jacob, you are everything to me," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. But the court didn't see it that way. They awarded custody to my father because he had a stable job, a nice house, and promises of a better life. My mother, with her meager part-time job, didn't stand a chance. She left to live with my grandparents in a small town a few hours' drive from Portland. As the door closed behind her, I felt a part of my heart tear apart. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching her figure fade into the distance, wondering if I'd done something wrong to make her leave me. From that moment, I became withdrawn. I was no longer the laughing, playful boy who ran around the backyard. I began to see the world as fragile, as if everything I loved could vanish at any moment. My father, though still present, didn't seem to notice the change in me. He was busy rebuilding his own life. To him, I was just a small part of a larger picture, one he didn't need to pay much attention to. 2 years later, when I was 12, Serena entered our lives. She took the Caldwell name and became my stepmother. My father met her at a business partner's party, and within months, they were married. Serena was much younger than my father, barely in her 30s, with glossy blonde hair and a sweet smile that always felt insincere to me. She was charming, knew how to talk, and knew how to make my father laugh, something I rarely saw since my mother left. But to me, her gaze was always cold, as if she were looking through me rather than at me. "Jacob, are you okay?" she would ask, but her voice never carried genuine concern. It was a perfunctory question meant to fill the silence at family dinners. My father changed after Serena came into the picture. He became dependent on her, letting her decide everything. From choosing schools for my half-siblings John, 12 years younger than me, and Lily, 14 years younger, to trivial matters like what to buy for dinner. John and Lily were the center of this new world my father and Serena built. They were adorable, I won't deny that. John loved soccer and often asked me about games, while Lily would snuggle up during cartoon marathons. But no matter how much I tried to love them, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider in this house. I was like a ghost, quietly passing through familiar hallways where my mother's laughter once echoed, now filled with a sense of estrangement. Our 3-story craftsman house, where I grew up, now felt different. It was still beautiful, but inside, the air grew heavy, as if an invisible fog had settled in. The basement, or the cellar as we called it, was the place that unsettled me most. It lay deep underground, accessible by an old wooden staircase descending into darkness. The musty smell, the sound of water seeping through the walls, and the bone-chilling cold always made me shudder. As a child, I was curious to explore it, but Serena, from the moment she moved in, forbade me. "It's dangerous, Jacob," she said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "It's not a place for kids to play." My father didn't object, and I, a 12-year-old boy, didn't dare question further. But every time I passed the door leading to the basement, I couldn't shake an inexplicable unease, as if something was lurking in the shadows. The years that followed were marked by loneliness. I learned to hide my emotions, to smile when Serena asked about me, to nod when my father talked about his company. But deep down, I always felt I didn't belong. My only solace was my phone calls with my mother. Monica, though far away, was a light in my darkest days. I would call her on weekends, telling her about school, my dreams, and the sorrows I didn't dare share with anyone else. "You're stronger than you think, Jacob," she would say, her voice warm through the phone. Thankfully, my father didn't forbid me from contacting her. It was perhaps the one thing he did right by me. Those conversations with my mother were a balm for my soul, but even so, they couldn't fill the void left by the divorce. I missed the days when our family gathered around the dinner table, when my mother hummed softly in the kitchen, when my father still hugged me and asked about my scribbled drawings. Now, the dinner table was Serena's domain, with perfectly arranged dishes and polite but empty words. John and Lily laughed and played. My father nodded along, and I just sat there, feeling like I was swallowing unease with every bite. I began to realize I was no longer part of this family. Serena always found ways to push me to the sidelines. She never said it outright, but I felt it through her glances, through the way she spent time with John and Lily, but rarely asked about me. Once, I overheard her talking to my father. "Jacob's grown up. He'll manage on his own." Her voice was soft, but I heard the coldness in it. My father only mumbled in response, and I knew he had chosen her side. My teenage years passed quietly. I focused on school, books, and dreams of a future where I could leave that house behind. At 18, I moved out, went to college in Portland, and started living on my own. But even after leaving the Craftsman house, the memories of it, and especially that dark basement, continued to haunt me. I didn't know that years later, that very basement would reveal a horrifying secret, forcing me to see my entire life in a completely different light. Now, at 24, I've graduated carrying a degree and a jumble of unformed ambitions. I live in a small rented apartment near downtown Portland. The smell of coffee from the shop downstairs mingles with the sound of car horns and the city's frenetic pace. It's not spacious, just enough room for a bed, a small desk, shelves crammed with novels and psychology books. I live independently, relying on money from a part-time job at an old bookstore and a modest allowance from my mother. Monica, though far away, remains my anchor. Every month, she sends me a little money along with hastily written letters full of encouragement. "You'll find your path, Jacob," she writes. I keep those letters in a small wooden box, a reminder that someone out there truly cares. I often visit my mother, driving a few hours to the small town where she lives with my grandparents. Those weekends are a balm for my soul, sitting in her warm kitchen, sipping hot tea, listening to her stories about the old days. I feel like myself again, a Jacob who doesn't have to hide his emotions or brace himself against the world. But with my father and Serena, it's a different story. I keep my distance, only occasionally visiting the old Craftsman house, usually when John or Lily texts me. My relationship with my father now feels like a fragile thread stretched to the point of snapping. Serena, meanwhile, plays the role of the perfect stepmother, with polite inquiries and carefully calculated smiles. But I know beneath that facade, there's nothing but distance. Then things started getting strange a few months ago. I'm not sure when I first noticed, but my body no longer felt like my own. Sudden headaches would strike, as if someone were hammering at my temples. Some days, I'd wake up dizzy, the world tilting around me. Fatigue clung to me, persistent and inexplicable. I'd always been healthy, rarely catching so much as a cold, so these symptoms worried me. I went to a doctor, undergoing a battery of tests, brain scans, blood work, the works. But the results showed nothing abnormal. "It's probably stress from overwork, Jacob," the doctor said, handing me a prescription for supplements and advising more rest. I took the pills religiously, but nothing changed. The exhaustion persisted, like an invisible shadow trailing me everywhere. Around the same time, Serena suddenly became more attentive. Phone calls from her started coming more frequently, her voice syrupy sweet. "Jacob, it's been a while since you came home. Why don't you join us for dinner this weekend?" she'd say, in a way that left me both surprised and suspicious. I wanted to believe she was sincere, that after all these years, she genuinely wanted to mend our relationship. But every time I heard her voice, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint what. I started visiting my father's house more often, partly because of Serena's invitations, partly because I wanted to see John and Lily. Family dinners took place in the familiar dining room, bathed in the warm glow of yellow light, the air filled with the aroma of food. But every time I sat at the table, I noticed a strange feeling. The food, though meticulously prepared, sometimes had an odd taste. Not spoiled, but something indescribable, like a faint metallic or chemical undertone. I once asked Serena about a dish, but she just smiled and said it was a new recipe she'd learned. My father, as usual, paid no attention. He ate quickly, mumbled about work, then buried himself in his phone. John and Lily, oblivious, laughed and chatted about school. I was the only one sitting there, holding my spoon, feeling like I was swallowing unease with every bite. That feeling grew stronger whenever I stayed overnight. Some nights, I jolt awake to strange sounds echoing from the basement, clanging metal, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. Then there was a sharp, acrid smell, like incense mixed with something chemical, drifting through the crack under my door. I'd lie there, heart pounding, straining to listen. But when I stepped out of my room, the hallway was dark and silent, as if it had all been my imagination. The next morning, I'd try approaching the basement door, but it was always locked tight, as if meant to keep out the curious. I asked Serena about it once, keeping my tone casual. "It's nothing, Jacob," she said, her eyes flicking over me like a flash of lightning. "Just for safety." Those visits to my father's house took a toll on my health. The headaches became more frequent, sometimes so intense I had to lie down, clutching my head in the dark. Dizziness, fatigue, and an unnamed heaviness clung to me. I started tracking my symptoms, trying to find a pattern, a cause. Was it stress, as the doctor said, or poor diet? But deep down, a vague instinct began to grow. Something was wrong in that house, in the meals, in Serena's glances. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was just blowing my loneliness out of proportion into something more sinister. But the instinct clung to me like a whisper in my mind, urging me to be careful. I told myself to stay calm, that maybe I was just being overly sensitive. A few weeks passed, and I tried to focus on my life. Job interviews, extra shifts at the bookstore, and calls with my mother. But every time I thought about the old Craftsman house, my heart raced. I started avoiding visits to my father's place, making excuses about being busy to decline Serena's dinner invitations. One Saturday afternoon, while tidying up my small apartment, I realized I'd left some important personal items at my father's house, a folder of university documents, and an old camera I'd used for a photography class. I hesitated, knowing the family was away on a trip, and the house would be empty. But ultimately, I decided to stop by, grab my things, and leave quickly. That day, Portland's sky was overcast, heavy clouds, threatening rain. I drove to the Craftsman house, the place I once called home. Parking in the driveway, I noticed the eerie quiet. No sound of Lily's laughter, no grumbling from my father, no trace of Serena's saccharine yet cold voice. The family was on vacation, and I hadn't been invited. A pang of hurt crept in, though I tried to convince myself it didn't matter anymore. I unlocked the front door with the spare key my father had given me. The house was silent, save for the steady ticking of the wall clock. I headed straight to my old room, where a few belongings remained from when I moved out. On the dusty desk, I found the folder and the camera. As I reached for them, my eyes caught a framed photo on the bookshelf. It showed my father, Serena, John, and Lily beaming in some summer park. I wasn't in the picture. A chill ran down my spine. I stood frozen, my chest tightening as years of being pushed to the margins flooded back, heavy and suffocating. But I shook my head, trying to dispel the familiar pain. I stuffed the folder and camera into my bag, ready to leave. At that moment, the lights in the house flickered and went out. A sharp click echoed, and the house plunged into darkness. I stood still, my heartbeat thundering in the silence. Outside, rain began to patter, but there was no sign of a storm or lightning. The electrical system had failed. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and checked the breaker panel in the hallway. Everything seemed fine, but no electricity flowed. Muttering a curse, I knew I couldn't leave the house like this until my father and Serena returned. I searched online and found the number for a local electrician. After a few calls, I reached Mike, a middle-aged man with a warm, gravelly voice. "I'll be right over, kid," he said. "Just stay calm." Mike arrived about 15 minutes later, carrying a worn toolbox and a large flashlight. He did a quick check in the hallway, shaking his head when he saw the breaker was fine. Must be an issue with the main system, he muttered thoughtfully. Do you know where the main electrical box is? I pointed toward the basement door, my heart suddenly racing. Down in the basement, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I'm not sure what it's like down there. I don't go down often. Mike raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. He walked to the basement door, inspecting the shiny lock. Locked up this tight? You got treasure down there or something? He joked, but I could only muster a weak smile. In my mind, Serena's warning echoed. It's dangerous, Jacob. Don't go down there. As a child, I'd obeyed her, not out of fear, but to avoid conflict. But now, standing before that door, a cold shiver ran through me. Something wasn't right, and I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it. Should we wait for my dad? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I mean, he might know more about the system. Mike shrugged, resting his hand on the doorknob. You can wait if you want, but if we don't fix this now, the house will be dark for days. I just need to check the box. It won't take long. He was right. I couldn't leave the house in this state. I took a deep breath and nodded. All right, go ahead and check it. I'll come with you. Mike nodded, pulling a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters from his toolbox and setting them against the rusted iron lock. The grinding sound of metal on metal pierced the quiet, sending goosebumps across my skin. With one strong twist, the lock snapped open. The basement door creaked open, its hinges groaning like a long-imprisoned lament. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying a thick, musty odor mixed with something else. Sharp, acrid, like dried blood blended with the remnants of burning incense. My throat tightened, a chill prickled my skin. We descended the old wooden staircase step by step, the weak beam of the flashlight barely piercing the thick darkness a few feet ahead. Mike swept his flashlight around the room, its light grazing stained concrete walls, dusty wooden shelves, and dark corners I didn't dare look at directly. The electrical box is probably around here somewhere, he muttered, but his voice trembled slightly, as if he too sensed the wrongness of this place. I didn't respond. My gaze was drawn to a corner of the room where my flashlight's beam landed on a rough wooden table covered with a black cloth. On it were half-burned black candles, their wax hardened into long, dripping streaks like dried tears. At the center of the table sat a small glass jar filled with a dark red liquid that glinted under the light. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and caught a sharp, unmistakable smell. Blood. Next to the jar was a crude cloth doll, no bigger than a hand, pierced with rusted pins. On its fabric face, the word Jacob was clumsily stitched in red thread, like a curse etched into being. My breath caught, the air in the room seeming to tighten around my throat. Good God, Mike whispered, his flashlight freezing on the table. I turned to see him step back, his face pale in the dim light. What the hell is this? He asked, his voice shaking. I could only nod, words failing me. On the table was also a small wooden box, its lid open, revealing tiny milky white animal bones, perhaps from a bird or a rat, mixed with charred paper talismans covered in strange symbols. My head spun as if I'd stepped into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I swung my flashlight to the wall, and my heart stopped as the light fell on a photograph. It was me, an old picture from college, taken at a school picnic. I was smiling in it, carefree and naive, unaware that this photo would end up here, in this basement. Around the picture, a circle had been drawn in red paint, surrounded by bizarre symbols, as if someone had deliberately marked me. Nearby, on a wooden shelf, an open notebook lay sprawled, filled with handwritten scrawls. My name, Jacob Caldwell, repeated over and over like a relentless curse. You need to call the police, Jacob, Mike said, his voice now barely a whisper. This isn't normal. I've never seen anything like this. He took another step back, his eyes wide with fear. I wanted to say something to reassure him, but I couldn't. The pieces in my mind began to click together, forming a horrifying picture I didn't want to believe was real. The headaches, the dizziness, the unexplained fatigue. They weren't random. I thought of the meals at my father's house, the strange metallic or chemical taste in the food. I remembered Serena's probing gaze, as if she were sizing me up, waiting for something. I recalled the nights I heard noises from the basement, the times I saw her slip down here in the middle of the night when the house was asleep. All those details I dismissed as imagination now stood out as clear as day. Serena, my stepmother, wasn't just distant. She was doing something far more sinister. A dark ritual, a curse, a plot to destroy me. I stood there, frozen, my trembling hand clutching the phone. My heart pounded as if it might burst through my chest. I wasn't just the abandoned son pushed to the edges of the family. I was the target of something dark, malevolent, and incomprehensible. I looked back at the cloth doll with my name stitched on it, feeling as though someone were squeezing my heart. Why? Why was Serena doing this? And my father, did he know? Was he part of this scheme? I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and started taking pictures of everything. The table with the candles and glass jar, the doll, the photo on the wall, the notebook filled with writing. Each snapshot was a piece of evidence, a way to preserve the truth before it could be erased. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let fear consume me. Mike stood behind me, still in shock. "Jacob, we should get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "This isn't safe." I nodded, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. A single question echoed relentlessly in my mind. Why do they want to destroy me? I thought of my father, how he'd become a stranger over the years. I thought of Serena with her fake smiles and cold eyes. I thought of John and Lily, innocent siblings who likely knew nothing of the darkness enveloping this family. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step heavy, as if dragging an entire world behind me. Mike followed, silent. When we emerged from the basement, I closed the door, but the sense of dread clung to me. I knew I'd just uncovered a secret I couldn't unsee. The Craftsman house, once my home, now felt like a trap. And I, without a doubt, was the prey. I checked my phone, staring at the photos on the screen. Each one a stark reminder of the horrifying truth. My legs trembled as if the floor were crumbling beneath my steps. Mike, the electrician, stood a few feet away, clutching his toolbox, his face still etched with shock. "Jacob," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to call the police right now." I nodded, but my hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I dialed 911. After a few rings, a calm female voice answered. "911, what's your emergency?" I cleared my throat, trying not to stammer. "I'm Jacob Caldwell, at my father's house in the Portland suburbs. I just found something strange in the basement. There are things. I think they're related to some kind of cult or something dangerous. Please come quickly." My voice faltered, but I managed to describe what I'd seen. The doll, the jar of blood, the symbols. The operator paused before asking a few questions to confirm the address. Mike, standing nearby, gestured for the phone, and I handed it to him. "I'm Mike, the electrician," he said, his voice steadier than mine. "I can confirm what he's saying. Everything down here is very wrong. You need to send someone now." Mike's confirmation seemed to prioritize the call. The operator instructed us to wait outside the house and not touch anything in the basement. Mike and I stepped out into the front yard, standing under a gray sky, where a light drizzle fell. I clutched my phone, the photos still open on the screen, as if they were the only proof keeping me from doubting myself. Mike said nothing, just stared down the street, but I could sense the tension in his every movement. Less than 20 minutes later, a police car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a younger woman with sharp eyes. They introduced themselves as Officer Harris and Officer Lopez. "You're Jacob Caldwell?" Harris asked, his hand resting on his belt near his holstered gun. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, that's me. I called 911. There's something really strange in the basement. I need you to check it out." Harris raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Lopez. "Strange how?" Lopez asked, her tone carrying a hint of skepticism. I understood her reaction. My story sounded like something out of a low-budget horror movie. There's a doll with my name on it, symbols on the walls, and a jar that looks like it's filled with blood, I said, showing them the photos on my phone. Harris glanced at them, but didn't seem entirely convinced. "Could be someone's prank," he said calmly, "or some weird art project. We'll check it out, but stay calm." Blood rushed to my face. "This isn't a prank," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm not imagining this. Please just go down there and see." Lopez nodded, gesturing to Harris. "All right, lead us down," she said. I took a breath, opened the front door, and guided them to the basement door. Mike followed, but kept his distance, as if he didn't want to go back down there. The wooden stairs creaked under our feet. The musty smell mixed with the sharp scent of incense hit me again, sending a shiver through me. I turned on my flashlight, illuminating the path downward. When we reached the basement, I pointed to the wooden table draped in black cloth. Harris and Lopez swept their flashlights around the room, and I saw their expressions shift from skepticism to shock. Harris paused at the table, his light falling on the doll with my name. "Jesus," he muttered, so low I barely heard him. Lopez stepped closer, eyeing the glass jar with its dark red liquid, then turned to the photo of me on the wall, encircled by red paint and strange symbols. She exchanged a look with Harris, and this time there was no trace of doubt. "This isn't a prank," Lopez said, her voice grave. "We need to seal this place off." Harris nodded, pulling out his radio to call for immediate backup. I stood there feeling like the world was collapsing around me. The fear I'd felt was now validated by the officer's expressions. This wasn't my imagination. Something horrific was happening, right in the house I once called home. Soon, an investigative team arrived. They brought cameras, evidence bags, and equipment I couldn't identify. They photographed everything: the table, the doll, the jar, the notebook. A tall officer introducing himself as Detective Carter asked me to recount the entire incident. I sat in the living room, their flashlights illuminating the darkened house. I told them about the headaches, the dizziness, the strange taste in the food, and Serena's suspicious behavior. I described the nights I heard noises from the basement, her cold stares, and my gut feeling that something was wrong. Carter took careful notes, nodding occasionally. "Do you think anyone in your family is involved?" he asked, his eyes sharp. I hesitated. "I think it's Serena," I said, my voice trembling. "She always forbade me from going to the basement. And the meals. I felt worse after eating here." I paused, thinking of my father. "My dad? I'm not sure, but I don't think he's entirely innocent." Carter nodded, without commenting further. He told me to stay in touch and promised a thorough investigation. The house was temporarily sealed off with yellow tape stretched across the basement door. As the police cars drove away, I stood in the front yard, rain soaking my shoulders. I felt a mix of relief. Finally, someone believed me, and dread for the gruesome truth unfolding. My family, or what was left of it, wasn't just broken. It was hiding a dark secret, and I was at its center. That night, I didn't return to my apartment. I drove straight to my mother's house in the small town a few hours from Portland. When I arrived, my mother and grandparents were in the living room, bathed in the warm glow of a lamp. I told them everything, from breaking the basement lock to what I found. My mother listened, initially skeptical, her eyes filled with worry. "Jacob, are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos. When my mother and grandparents saw the cloth doll, the jar of blood, and my photo on the wall, they were stunned. My grandfather, usually a man of few words, shook his head, muttering, "I've never seen anything like this." My mother pulled me into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "My boy," she whispered, her voice choked. I sat there in her arms, feeling like a piece of my heart had shattered. Several days passed, and I stayed at my mother's house, trying to find some peace in her warm kitchen and comforting stories. But every time I closed my eyes, the images from the basement flooded back. The cloth doll with my name, the jar of blood, the red symbols. I checked my phone constantly, waiting for news from the police. Detective Carter had promised to follow up, and I knew they were investigating, but the waiting made me restless, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure when I'd fall. Then one morning, my phone buzzed. It was Carter. "Jacob," he said, his voice grave, "you need to come to your father's house now. Your family just returned from their trip. We need you here for a confrontation." My heart pounded, but I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'll be right there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. I shook my head. "I have to do this alone, Mom." She hugged me tightly, as if trying to transfer her strength to me. As I drove to the Craftsman house, Portland's sky remained gray, mirroring my mood. Pulling into the familiar street, I saw my father's car parked in the driveway, with several suitcases scattered haphazardly. They were back. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and felt my heart racing so loudly I could hear it. The front door was wide open, and my father's angry voice echoed from inside. "What is this nonsense?" he roared, clutching his phone. "Who dared to put police tape on my house?" I stepped inside, and the air in the living room seemed to freeze. My father, Samuel, stood there, his face flushed with rage. Serena was beside him, her blonde hair neatly tied back, but I noticed her eyes flicker when she saw me. John and Lily, my younger siblings, stood in a corner, looking small and confused. "Jacob," my father said, frowning, his voice lowering but still sharp. "What the hell is going on?" Before I could respond, Serena cut in, her voice icy but controlled. "Richard, I've already called the police," she said. "They said they're sending someone to explain. This must be a mistake. There's no way our house is being treated like a crime scene." My father waved his phone. "I just spoke to them. They said there was a report from some witness about our basement." Before I could answer, the sound of police sirens filled the air outside. Detective Carter walked in, accompanied by Officers Harris and Lopez. Behind them was another investigative team, carrying equipment and wearing stern expressions. "Mr. Samuel Caldwell, Mrs. Serena Caldwell," Carter said, his voice calm but sharp. "We need your cooperation to address some serious concerns regarding this house." Serena smiled, but it was stiff like a mask. "There must be a misunderstanding, officer," she said, her tone saccharine as ever. "We just got back from a trip, and we know nothing about this." My father nodded, his gaze shifting from me to Carter. "Exactly. I want an explanation right now." Carter didn't respond. He gestured to me. "Jacob, can you tell us what you saw?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. I started speaking, my voice shaky, but growing steadier. "I came here to pick up some things, and the power went out. I called an electrician, and we went to the basement to check. Down there, I found... I paused, locking eyes with Serena, and recounted every detail I'd seen. The cloth doll, the pinned photo, the jar of blood, the notebook. My voice trembled with tension. The room fell silent, the air heavy. My father's frown deepened, and Serena froze briefly before regaining her composure. "Jacob, what are you talking about?" my father asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Are you making this up for attention, kid?" But I didn't back down. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, and handed it to Carter. He held up the screen for my father and Serena to see. "This is what we found," Carter said, "and we need an explanation from both of you." Serena let out a laugh, but it was dry and unnatural. "Officer, these are just spiritual items," she said. "A few things I use to pray for the family's safety. There's nothing dangerous about them." She looked at me, her eyes cold, but still holding that calculated smile. "Jacob, you've misunderstood. I'd never do anything to hurt you." Blood rushed to my face. I stepped forward, facing Serena, my voice shaking but resolute. "You're lying," I said, each word carved from my chest. "What did you do to me?" The headaches, the fatigue, the strange taste in the food. "It was all you, wasn't it? You wanted me to waste away, didn't you?" My father shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "Jacob, that's enough," he shouted. "You don't talk to your stepmother like that. This is nonsense, a stupid prank." But I didn't back down. I looked him in the eyes, feeling for the first time unafraid of him. "Did you know about this, Dad? Or are you part of it, too?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. He froze, his eyes flickering, but he didn't answer. Carter raised a hand, calling for calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, we have clear evidence of a ritualistic setup in the basement with items specifically targeting Jacob. This isn't a joke. We need a clear explanation, or we'll have to proceed according to the law." Serena began to deflect, her voice growing frantic. "I told you, it's just for prayers. I don't know anything about pins or blood." But her eyes, filled with tension and panic, betrayed her lie. My father stood silent, his hands clenched as if wrestling with himself. I looked at him, hoping for a moment that he'd say something. Defend me, show me he was still my father. But he just lowered his head, mute. Suddenly, more police sirens sounded outside. Another investigative team entered, carrying paperwork and an arrest warrant. Carter looked at my father and Serena, his voice cold as steel. "Samuel Caldwell, Serena Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit premeditated murder." Another officer stepped forward, reading their rights, while Lopez and Harris moved in, preparing to cuff them. Serena burst into tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. She struggled, shouting, "You can't do this. I didn't do anything." My father, in contrast, was silent, his face pale, as if his entire world had collapsed. As the police cuffed them, I heard soft sobbing from the staircase. I turned to see John and Lily standing there, eyes red and terrified as they watched their parents being led away. Lily ran to me, hugging me tightly, crying. "Jacob, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I held her, but I didn't know how to answer. John stood still, fists clenched, his eyes filled with anger and pain. As the police escorted my father and Serena to the cars, I stood frozen at the door, watching them disappear behind flashing red and blue lights. Serena glanced back, her eyes no longer masking her fury. My father didn't look at me, didn't say a word. My heart felt crushed, but at the same time, a wave of relief washed over me. The family I'd clung to for so long, the perfect facade of my father, Serena, John, and Lily, was now revealed as something rotten, steeped in lies and darkness. I stood there under the drizzling rain, watching the police cars fade into the distance. Carter patted my shoulder, his voice softer now. "You did well, Jacob. We'll keep investigating. Stay in touch." I nodded, but my mind was reeling. The truth was out, but it left a void in me, part loss, part freedom. A few days later, the police continued their search of the Craftsman house. Detective Carter called me, his voice serious but not cold. "Jacob, we found some important documents in your father's house. Some of them concern you. We've contacted a lawyer, Mr. Collins, who has worked with your family before. You should meet with him." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling a chill run through me. Documents about me? I agreed to meet Carter and Mr. Collins at the lawyer's office the next morning. But inside, I couldn't stop wondering what other secrets were waiting for me. Mr. Collins's office was in downtown Portland, a small building with large windows and warm wooden furnishings. When I walked in, Mr. Collins, a man in his 60s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, stood to greet me. He had a kind smile, but his eyes carried a gravity that unsettled me. "Jacob, please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Detective Carter stood in the corner, nodding at me as if to offer reassurance. On the desk was a thick file filled with aging papers, some yellowed at the edges. "Jacob," Mr. Collins began, his voice deep and clear. "What I'm about to tell you may be hard to accept, but you need to know the truth." He pushed the file toward me, opening it to a page bearing the familiar signatures of my grandparents. "This is documentation of a trust fund established years ago by your grandparents, Henry and Eleanor Caldwell. The fund is worth approximately $2 million, and it's in your name. You'll inherit it fully when you turn 25. I sat there, stunned. $2 million? The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, pressing against my chest. "I don't understand," I stammered. "Why didn't I know about this?" Mr. Collins sighed, pushing his glasses up his forehead. "Until you came of age, all documents related to the trust were sent to your legal guardian, your father, Samuel. He's known about it for years." Mr. Collins's words hit me like a knife. My father knew. Serena, my stepmother, must have known, too. And then, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place, it all made sense. Everything that had happened had a reason. They wanted me dead. If I were gone, the trust fund would fall to my father, and Serena, with her cunning, would surely find a way to claim it. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to suppress the anger and pain surging within me. Carter stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We are investigating when Samuel and Serena began planning this," he said. "What you found in the basement, combined with these documents, provides strong evidence of their motive." I nodded, but my mind felt numb. My father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders, who taught me to tie my shoes, had chosen money over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and honeyed words, had made me the target of a sinister plot. I felt as if my heart were being torn apart. Yet, at the same time, a cold clarity settled over me. All those years of loneliness, of feeling like I didn't belong in the family, now they made sense. As I left Mr. Collins's office, I carried a copy of the trust fund documents and a storm of emotions in my heart. On the way back to my apartment, I stopped at a small park, sitting quietly on a bench as memories flooded in. I thought of my childhood, when my grandparents were still alive. My grandfather, with his white hair and warm voice, would sit on the porch telling me stories of his youth. He taught me how to tie knots, identify plants, and, above all, that honesty was the most precious thing. "Jacob, live in a way that you're never ashamed of yourself," he'd said, his eyes shining with conviction. My grandmother was different, gentle like a summer breeze. She'd hold me close, softly singing old folk songs and cooking meals whose smells I still remember. When my parents divorced, it was my grandparents who comforted me. I recalled afternoons in the kitchen with my grandmother, eating freshly baked cookies while she shared stories of her youth. When I was sad about my mother leaving, my grandfather would take me to the garden, showing me how to care for plants, as if to say that life goes on no matter how much it hurts. My grandfather passed away when I was 13, taken by a sudden stroke. A year later, my grandmother followed, leaving a void I could never fill. But now, sitting on that bench, holding the trust fund documents, I realized they had never truly left me. This trust fund, this $2 million, wasn't just money. It was their love, the final shield they left to protect me. Yet, ironically, that same love had become the reason my father and Serena wanted to destroy me. I felt both pain and gratitude. Pain for the betrayal by those closest to me, driven by greed. Gratitude for my grandparents, who, even in death, found a way to shield me. I felt as if they were watching me from somewhere, and I vowed not to let greed or betrayal destroy what they believed in me. That evening, back in my small apartment, I opened the old photo album my mother had sent me long ago. I flipped to a page with a picture of me with my grandparents, taken during a summer picnic. I was an 8-year-old boy, beaming between them, sunlight filtering through the trees. I touched the photo, feeling as if their warmth lingered. "I'll live worthy of this legacy," I whispered, my voice choked. "I won't let greed ruin what you believed in me." The months that followed were a whirlwind of court hearings and sensational headlines. The Oregon court began the trial of my father, Samuel Caldwell, and my stepmother, Serena Caldwell, just a few months after their arrest. I didn't attend every session. I wasn't sure I had the strength to face them again, but I followed along through calls from Detective Carter and brief reports in the local news. The story of the Caldwell family, once a comfortable middle-class household, became the center of public attention. "Murder plot in Craftsman home," one headline read. "Poison, greed, horrifying secrets in the basement," screamed another. Each time I read those words, it felt like someone was squeezing my chest. The trial dragged on longer than I expected, with evidence presented day by day. The photos I took in the basement were shown in court. Experts analyzed the liquid in the glass jar, confirming it was animal blood. But the symbols and rituals were more complex, tied to an obscure form of occult practice. My testimony, along with that of Mike, the electrician, and Mr. Collins, the family lawyer, painted a clear picture. Serena was the mastermind, orchestrating the horrific rituals to harm me. My father, though not directly involved in the rituals, was found guilty of complicity for knowing about the trust fund and failing to stop Serena. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in my apartment, clutching my phone when Carter called. "Jacob," he said, his voice steady but clear. "The court has reached a verdict. Samuel Caldwell has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Serena Caldwell received 30 years for her role as the mastermind and for carrying out the occult activities." I stayed silent, letting his words sink in. 25 years. 30 years. The numbers echoed in my mind, but they didn't bring a sense of triumph. Only a deep sadness, as if I'd lost something forever. The Caldwell family, once my father's pride, was now a stain in the eyes of the world. I hung up, sank into a chair, and stared out the window. Rain fell again, as if to wash away what remained of the past. Time passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I found a stable job at a counseling center, working part-time while preparing for graduate school. The headaches and dizziness gradually faded, as if my body knew the threat was gone. I stayed in touch with John and Lily, but each meeting was marked by their visible pain. They didn't blame me, but I knew they were struggling to understand why their parents had done this. I tried to be there for them, but the distance between us felt unbridgeable. Then came my 25th birthday, marking 2 years since that horrific discovery. I didn't want a big celebration. That evening, I drove to my mother's house, where she and my grandparents had prepared a small party. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked cookies, and on the table was a simple chocolate birthday cake with "Happy Birthday, Jacob" written in white frosting. My mother hugged me, her eyes shining with joy, tinged with worry. "You've really grown up," she said, ruffling my hair as she did when I was a child. My grandparents, though aged, smiled warmly and shared old stories, as if trying to pull me back to carefree days. I blew out the candles, cut the cake, and laughed with my mother and grandparents. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a birthday. It was the start of a new chapter, one free from the weight of the past. The next morning, I got a call from Mr. Collins asking me to come to his office. I knew what was coming. When I stepped into Mr. Collins's office, he greeted me with his familiar, kind smile. On the desk was a new file and a pale yellow envelope. "Jacob," he said warmly, "today is the day you officially become the legal beneficiary of the trust fund your grandparents left you. $2 million, all yours." He pushed the file toward me, explaining the legal details, but I only half listened. My mind drifted to the old days when my grandparents were still here, when I was a boy running through their garden. Then Mr. Collins handed me the envelope. "This is from your grandparents," he said. "They wrote it before they passed, instructing me to give it to you when you turned 25. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. My grandmother's handwriting, soft and elegant, spelled my name on the front. I thanked Mr. Collins, my voice catching. "Thank you," I said, emotions welling up, "for everything." That afternoon, I walked to a nearby park where the maple trees were turning a vibrant red. I sat on a bench, opened the envelope, and began to read. My grandparents' words came alive as if they were speaking to me. "Dear Jacob, you are our greatest joy. No matter how hard life gets, no matter what challenges you face, remember that you are stronger than you know. We left this trust for you, not just for a better life, but so you can live true to your heart. Live kindly, honestly, and never let darkness dim the light inside you. Love you forever, Grandpa Henry and Grandma Eleanor." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I smiled. In that moment, I felt a sense of release, as if I'd finally found a home. Not the craftsman house steeped in darkness, but a home within my own heart. My grandparents, though gone, were still with me, guiding me through their loving words. A few weeks after my 25th birthday, a letter arrived at my apartment, sent from the Oregon State Penitentiary. The plain white envelope bore my father's scrawled handwriting, "Samuel Caldwell." My heart raced. I sat at the table, hands trembling as I opened it. The short lines, written in blue ballpoint pen, seemed like they took great effort to compose. "Jacob, I know you don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you one last time as your father. I don't expect forgiveness, but please let me see you. You're still my son, Samuel." I read the letter over and over, each word piercing like a needle. Father. The word felt foreign, like a memory from another life. I thought of the years growing up in his indifference, the times he chose work, chose Serena over me. I thought of the basement, the pinned cloth doll, the trust fund he and Serena were willing to kill me for. Part of me wanted to tear the letter up, throw it away, and forget he ever existed. But another part urged me to face him one last time, not to reconcile, but to close the chapter. I spent several sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to walk into that room, look into his eyes, and say goodbye. Finally, I decided to go, not for him, but for myself. I needed to end the past, to break the chains holding me back. I called the prison to confirm the visit, and the next morning I drove there, my heart heavy but my resolve unshaken. The Oregon State Penitentiary sat on the outskirts, a gray fortress of high concrete walls and barbed wire. I passed through security, feeling as if I were entering another world, cold, dark, and filled with metallic echoes. A guard led me to the visitation room, a small space with white walls and a thick glass partition separating me from the other side. I sat on a hard plastic chair, hands clasped tightly, trying to stay calm. The door on the other side opened, and my father walked in. I barely recognized him. Samuel Caldwell, once a man who exuded authority, now looked haggard, his hair grayer, his face gaunt, his eyes weary. He wore an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, but he tried to hold his head high, as if clinging to a shred of the father I once knew. He sat down, picked up the phone, and looked at me through the glass. "Jacob," he said, his voice weak. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond right away, just stared at him as if seeing a stranger. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice colder than I'd intended. He attempted a weak smile, but it faded quickly. "I just wanted to talk. I want you to know I never meant to hurt you. I let things go too far." His voice faltered, but I felt no pity. His words sounded hollow, like a poorly acted play. "You knew about the trust fund," I said, locking eyes with him. "You knew what Serena was doing, and you didn't stop her." He bowed his head, his eyes red, but he didn't deny it. "I was wrong, Jacob," he whispered. "I got caught up in ambition, in what Serena said. I thought she was doing what was best for the family." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Family? You call that a family? You chose her? Chose money over me?" He didn't respond. His head lowered, as if my words were too heavy to bear. The door on his side opened again, and Serena was let in. My blood ran cold. Her once glossy blonde hair was disheveled, her face harsh, stripped of the polished facade that hid her true nature. Her eyes, cold and venomous, locked onto me. She picked up the phone, her voice still clinging to that fake sweetness. "Jacob, you've misunderstood," she said. "The things in the basement, they were just spiritual rituals. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at her, my gaze unwavering. "Don't call me your son," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You tried to kill me, Serena. Stop lying." She stiffened, her lips trembling, but her eyes burned with resentment, as if she hated me for ruining her plans. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice weakening as if she knew the truth was undeniable. I stood, setting the phone down. "I didn't come here to hear excuses," I said, looking from my father to Serena. "I came to say, I'm done with you both. This family died a long time ago. I'm not your son anymore, and I'm not your family. I'm choosing my own life, and there's no place in it for either of you." I turned and walked out, not looking back. I heard my father call my name, his voice breaking, but I didn't stop. Stepping out of the prison, I breathed in the free air, feeling as if I'd shed a burden carried for years. The visitation room door closed behind me, and I knew it was also closing on my past. I was no longer chained by memories of my father, Serena, or the Craftsman house steeped in darkness. Ahead of me lay an open road, and for the first time, I felt truly free. From that day forward, I severed all contact with Samuel and Serena. No letters, no calls, no mention of them in conversations with my mother or friends. They became part of my past, a scar on my heart, but no longer something that defined me. I focused on the present, on what I could build, and on a dream I'd nurtured for years, becoming a counselor to help young people like me, those who grew up in broken families, find the light within themselves. I enrolled in a graduate program in psychology at a university in Portland. The months that followed were a blur of classes, part-time shifts at the counseling center, and late nights hunched over my desk, scribbling notes. There were moments of exhaustion, but whenever I looked at my grandparents' letter, carefully tucked into my notebook, I found the strength to keep going. Live true to your heart, they had written, and I was determined to do just that. The $2 million trust fund my grandparents left me was a significant responsibility, but I managed it carefully. A portion covered my tuition and living expenses, ensuring I could focus on my studies without financial worry. Another portion was invested long-term. Following the advice of a financial advisor, Mr. Collins recommended. I didn't want the money to be just a number in a bank account. I wanted it to mean something. So, I established a small fund in my grandparents' name, the Henry and Eleanor Fund, to support children who, like me, grew up without a complete sense of home. Each thank you letter from a charity felt like an extension of the love my grandparents had given me. With the remaining money, I bought a modest house in the Portland suburbs. Not the craftsman house, filled with painful memories, but a cozy place with large windows overlooking a small garden. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos of my mother, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and turned it into a true home. One afternoon, I called my mother, my voice hesitant but full of hope. "Mom, I want you to move in with me. This house, I want it to be our home." There was a pause. Then I heard her laugh, tinged with tears, through the phone. "Jacob, my boy," she said, "I'll be there." And so she moved in, bringing her old stories, her home-cooked meals, and evenings spent reminiscing. For the first time in years, I felt I truly had a family, not bound by blood, but by love. As the months passed, I found an inner peace. The nightmares of the basement, the cloth doll, and the jar of blood no longer haunted me. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night. No longer feared thinking of my father or Serena. Instead, I found joy in simple things. Brewing coffee for my mother in the morning, an inspiring class at school, or an afternoon helping a child at the counseling center share their pain. In me, my grandparents' memory became a guiding light. Their love, preserved in their letter and old photos, was strong enough to remind me that true love still existed, not from my father or Serena, but from those who chose to love me unconditionally. I also learned lessons no classroom could teach. I realized that blood doesn't always mean love. My father, once my entire world, chose greed over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and dark schemes, taught me that family isn't about shared blood, but about those who make you feel safe and loved. I learned to let go of hatred, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become like them, consumed by greed or malice. I chose forgiveness, not to erase what they did, but to free myself. My journey came to a quiet close one afternoon as I sat in my small backyard garden, watching wildflowers sway in the breeze. I thought of the boy Jacob, once frightened and alone in the craftsman house, believing he was unworthy of love. That boy had grown up, carrying scars, but also a new belief. The past may leave marks, but it doesn't dictate the future. I smiled, breathed in the fresh air, and felt a new beginning. Not loud or showy, but brimming with hope. My story didn't end with applause or fanfare. It ended in stillness, with the sound of birds chirping and sunlight filtering through the trees. In that moment, I knew I had found myself, not the abandoned son, not the target of a plot, but Jacob Caldwell, a man ready to live with an open heart, despite the darkness that once tried to consume me. What would you have done in my place, uncovering such a horrifying family secret? Have you ever had to choose between letting go of your past and holding on to an impossible hope? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.